Good day. My name's Sam Kemble with Workforce Delivery Inc. Today I'd like to talk to you about responding to grievances. In our line of work, we get called in often when a company is facing either general and overall escalation of issues. There might be a particular complex problem like a round of bargaining, or they're just simply to add more capacity. And with that, we have an opportunity to see a multitude of labor relations practitioners or internal labor relations resources. Not every company can dedicate or have a dedicated labor relations resource. But we have an opportunity to see how different companies handle grievances. And one of the observations that I've noticed is there's many of those responsible for handling labor relations issues that can open a file and mark a position, and manage a file through different steps through a grievance position process without doing too much damage to the case itself that would hinder a lawyer from then taking it and managing it to the point of near arbitration and, if necessary, full arbitration. At the end of the day, many labor relations resources have the ability to, again, just mark and defend a positional approach to a grievance. Very, very few have real capacity to close a file, absent just giving up or taking it all the way to arbitration. So today's discussion, I think there's a few is prompted because I see perhaps missed opportunities to enhance the relationship or dialogue that's happening between some companies and their union counterparts, and also to elevate the discussion from the standpoint of getting into the interests and more of the logic that supports a grievance or a grievance response that will possibly open up the doors for more off-ramps in terms of resolution points. So today, part of that is going to be about articulating issues with strength and empathy at the same time. And that last piece is the part that I see lacking. A lot of grievance responses aren't short of a strong statement of position, but more and more grievance responses I see are missing that empathy component, which has a results in often escalating or irritating a union counterpart, or even painting a union counterpart into a corner, which doesn't help the relationship. It certainly doesn't resolve or enhance the resolution of the issue. I also notice a lot of grievance responses that are terse. They're quite short and terse. And part of this comes from a fear of the internal labor relations resource that if they share why they think something's so, that the union's going to use it against them, or that it will somehow prejudice their position. And counter to that, however, absent giving reasons and explaining, blowing out the logic that supports a company's position on an issue, basically what happens is a very circular communication that happens between the union and the employer, where each party is just stating and restating their respective issues, and it just leads to righteous indignation and ultimately brinksmanship, because the files just keep moving closer and closer to arbitration until someone blinks. So I guess the purpose of this discussion is based on the belief that I think that we can do better than that, and have a few areas of focus that we might touch on that might just offer some tools to make that happen. So part of the um, approach is going to be, in the first part of our agenda, is going to be about becoming boring and predictable. And that's just in the thick of things in terms of responding to one issue or one grievance. Sometimes we forget we're managing a system, we're managing a relationship, and it's good. It's not a bad thing for labor relations reps to become boring and predictable. And I'll talk about that in a moment. And it's not a magic formula. It's just about relying on objective facts and objective standards, and maintaining high integrity throughout. There's also a requirement to do a little bit of a self-check just to make sure that our own perspective is, and I have to do this too. I think any labor relations practitioner that's been through complicated files have had to address themselves to see, look, where am I at with this file? Where am I at with this, with my relationship with conflict? Where am I at with this a particular individual? Are they pushing my buttons? Labor relations practitioners are human beings. They don't be professional by accident. So I'm going to talk about a self-check. Also, an empathy check. That's about understanding fully what kind of pressures the other side is addressing, and that's important before writing a grievance response. We're going to talk a little bit more of the technical stuff in terms of dissecting and organizing issues, if you will, that may be embedded in a grievance, some relevant, more relevant than others. We're going to talk about signaling points of resolution, and this also deals with managing a system of response as well, not just a one-off. Again, back to being predictable. So on one end of the spectrum, some labor relations rep only know how to horse trade. If you give me this, I'll give you that. And there isn't much that kind of approach can leave both union reps and employees and managers really scratching their head, wondering what's the point of all this. And on the other hand, there'd be a principle-based approach, which would be more of based on it's grounded in something, grounded in some principles important to the parties. If we go too rigid with that, we can be also unhelpful. There are rooms for gray, not along ethical lines, but so basically that discussion is going to talk about horse trading versus principle-based, and where does a person want to position themselves to be effective. And lastly, we'll touch a little bit on the writing itself. So first of all, this is about being predictable and boring, and labor relations reps have to be reminded, myself included, that it's not about us. And also, there's enough coming at a labor relations person in terms, and both union and management, in terms of issues and circumstances, that there's enough excitement to go around, let's put it that way, that we do not need to become part of the drama. There's enough drama already in what we do. So being boring isn't a bad thing. And to do that, I take a fairly formulaic approach. First of all, it's again high integrity. And the first element of that is just establishing or finding the objective facts. And often I'll include the union in seeking those objective facts. And just like I would expect from the union, I wouldn't want the union to tinker with the facts. They're facts, that's why they're called facts. And to afford a union counterpart the same luxury is we play the ball where it lies. Like, I do labor relations like I don't play golf. I'm not serious about golf. So if my ball is in a really, really bad situation, I'm also not going to take any trophies home. So I'll move the ball. And I know some golf purists are going to hate me for that, but I'm not a golf purist. I'm an amateur hack. Labor relations, I'm more of a purist. So just like any profession, you do it. You're not playing. You're playing. You're not playing for fun. You're playing. You might enjoy it, but you're playing because it's important. And with labor relations, I play the ball where it lies. So that doesn't mean though that we lead with our chin. And when fact, so we don't have to fall on the sword and bleed out everywhere every time something goes wrong. But we never are dishonest with the facts, and that's just something that a lawyer also can't fix. And I'll speak from my own perspective. If I botched a file, if I've done something stupid with a file, a lawyer can, if it gets down to a point of arbitration, a lawyer can usually fix that. They can say the company rep messed up. Fine. A lawyer can't fix unethical behavior. And arbitrators and tribunals, they just don't have much patience for that. So that kind of behavior, it just doesn't help the situation. It doesn't serve your organization either, and it would reduce your credibility in all forms on future cases as well. So basically, yes, we gather objective facts, and we also are mindful of who has the onus of proof. And in discipline cases and termination cases, it's very often the employer that has the onus of proof. And if there's an allegation that the company's violated the collective agreement, or a policy is against the collective agreement or law, or that a rule wasn't applied consistently, some of that onus often shifts to the union, but you have to take a look at each one. Also, it's important just to be aware of what is the standard of proof, and the standard of proof is not beyond a reasonable doubt, like what we hear on, when a newspaper is reporting on a criminal trial or something like that. It's not a beyond a reasonable doubt onus of proof standard. For us in labor relations, we're held to more of an administrative law standard, which is usually on a balance of probabilities. The second piece of being boring is objective standards. So relying on objective standards. And so basically what I end up doing with almost every file is I look for the objective facts, then I look for the objective standards, and then we weave the facts and the standards together and see where the issues shake out. It's a formula. It's a fairly boring but workable formula. So if I've disciplined someone or terminated someone, then arbitrator is first of all going to look at, or any tribunal is going to look at, well, if Bob was doing something that was putting his job in jeopardy, did Bob know at the time that he was putting his job in jeopardy? And if so, how? And or would Bob fully expect, if he was caught at this, that he would get discipline? So basically the first landing spot or source of objective standards that I like to look for on any file is, where are the rules? So is there a rule in place? Is it written? Where was it shared? Was it explained to the employee? Was it enforced consistently? And has it been enforced fairly? So that's one set of probably the main set of objective standards that we spend a lot of time with. But there are more objective standards that you can point to, like start and quit times. Again, objective facts is Sam came in at 7:15 a.m. The objective fact is I came in at 7:15 a.m. The objective standard is start times at 7 a.m. So now we start to weave that objective fact with objective standard and see where it shakes out. And the reason I'm going through this is basically setting out the framework for how I like to write grievance responses. So there's start quick times as an objective standard. If there's productivity issues, you can get average productivity metrics of individuals of similar experience and skill. There's attendance, and you can use attendance averages, and there's court cases on that. And actually, I've blogged about that as well. There's quality measurements. There's also legislation and regulation, which points to fairly profound objective standards to which both employers and employees are held. Sometimes that comes in play. Well, it can come into play in anything, but it can certainly come into play in regards to a safety issue or discrimination issue, that kind of stuff in the workplace. There's case law, cite precedents, so decisions that have been made in the past within that company's organization, and there's articles and studies. So there's all kinds of places where you can get objective standards, which an objective standard is something that was in place independent of the particular circumstance that you're facing, and you can point to it and it strengthens your argument or actually just clarifies your understanding of the situation if we move away from a positional approach. So by giving those, I just want to stay back on that for a moment, but to round out objective facts and objective standards, by using that weaving that into your writing of grievance responses, you're now giving the union leadership ammo, if you will, to deal with the grievance more reasonably. And again, a union doesn't always choose what grievances get filed. They have a duty to represent. So they have accountabilities to the member and to the membership and to themselves and their own executive. So by giving enough information in your grievance response, pointing to objective facts and objective standards, objective facts and objective standards can't be ignored. They have to be. That's why they're so powerful. They actually have to be addressed. So the conversation's elevated much beyond the company thinks this, the union thinks that. And you can cut off that. You can still be, it's possible to be in a loop, but in many of the cases, you'll fracture it and you'll break that loop, and you'll be elevating the conversation to how things should be handled versus positional approaches between the parties. Next is a little bit of a self-check, and it was I think Sigmund Freud that said, if it's not one thing, it's about your mom. Well, I'm going to pull in an example that rings true to myself. When I was 14, I was learning to drive, and it was actually my mother that taught me to drive. So she would go out with me in the car, and she gave me all kinds of tips, I should say, but one that really struck me, and I'm sure it was probably a self-preservation measure on her part, but she said that people should never be able to tell the mood that I'm in by the way that I'm driving. And that's always stuck with me. And it's always stuck with me in my driving. I'm not one of those road rage people. Well, I find the grievance responses, grievance writing, and overall issues management is the same way in labor relations. People shouldn't be, the union rep, the employees, they shouldn't be able to tell what kind of mood I'm in based on how I'm responding to a grievance, either in writing or in person. So with that, we need to touch base with ourselves every once in a while, and first of all, check in with our mood gauges. So how am I doing today? Am I tired? Am I upset? Am I irritated? All that kind of stuff. And with that self-awareness, we need to be deliberate and to make sure that fatigue or the irritability or even a happy mood doesn't bleed into how I'm responding to issues. Responding to issues should be very, again, boring and methodical. in the labor relations field. So I encourage labor relations folks or people that have that responsibility in their portfolio to do a mood check. Also, this is more of a general statement, but it's important for anyone that is addressing the labor relations portfolio to understand their own relationship with conflict. And everyone has a natural position that can be avoidance, could be passive aggressive, it could be assertive, it could be aggressive. And it doesn't matter what your natural proclivity is. What matters is for you to be aware of where you are naturally. And that for a couple reasons. One is if you're not thinking about it, that is where you're going to land. And also, if you are encumbered by a frustration, a fatigue, and irritability, unless you're deliberate about it, you're going to start migrating back into that safe, that natural place in terms of how you handle conflict communications. So labor relations professionals, they actually understand what is their natural spot, and that's fine. But over years and years of practice, they actually decide what is the most appropriate gear for this situation, and skilled labor relations people determine which approach they're going to take versus accidentally take an approach. So the key with this is just to be aware and be deliberate, and also don't let your emotions drive the bus from the standpoint of how you're responding to issues. The next piece is a little bit of an empathy check, and I see that I don't see this often actually when I work with organizations. I see it in bargaining, I should say. I see it in bargaining, and I see the empathy at the executive level when those to whom we're reporting grievance outcomes and results. The executive leadership usually has a tendency to have at least an understanding or a want to know in terms of what are the pushes and pressures of the union representatives involved in the file. But at the front end level of I guess less experienced labor relations and HR people, this is usually a missing component. And I guess the thing is I was at a bargaining table one point in time, and I was quite impressed by a labor relations colleague that held his hand up to the table and said, this is my hand, and you're looking at the hand and you see the palm of my hand, and I'm looking at the hand and I see the back of my palm hand. So we're looking at the same hand and we see different things. And yeah, that was impactful, if you will, from the standpoint of just simply stating that we view things from a different vantage point. But even that, it's quite a limiting approach to understanding empathy. It's not just the eye of the beholder. That's much too limiting. That assumes a closed system. And it assumes that we are aware of all the pressures that a union, actually it assumes that we have the same pressures, they just look at them differently. But in reality, in labor relations, it's much more complex than that. It's an open system. So there's a few things where we can take a look at, just as a checklist, if you will, is what is the union leader like, personality-wise? And to what extent does that union leader have a persona? Many union leaders actually manage themselves by creating a persona for themselves. And the thing about personas is they're simple and static. And because they're static, they're not real. And that, unless you're it can bog things down, just because anything that's static is one step away from reality. So you're not really talking to someone that's looking at the issue in front of you. You're talking about to someone who is looking at the issue in front of them within the context of upholding or protecting the persona that they're trying to protect. And it just adds a few steps to finding resolution. It's important to understand where the union leadership is in their election cycle. What kind of relationship does that union leader or representative have with the union executive? What about the union officers? Are they appointed or elected? Do they have much experience? Are they green? Are they more emotional, or are they more tempered in their approach? What's the tone of the membership, and to whom this union rep will ultimately have to respond to as well? What other pressures and aspirations and biases and opinions? What about past cases which may have left a bad taste in their mouth, or even may have emboldened the union or this union rep? And also, it's important to weave in or try to take a look at the corporate context and look at it from the standpoint of the union's position as well. So are there layoffs? Are there profits going through the roof? Do they feel that generally are they getting a fair shake? I actually write this stuff down, and it's a good exercise because it forces us to start to at least understand and take that step to closing the gap to understanding what is driving this, and also what it also puts forward for us in our own mind, what is important, what might be less important, and again, it helps us understand possible paths or identify paths that might lead towards a resolution or a resolve on this type of stuff. So we've covered quite a bit of ground in just in terms of at a high level, but I just want to touch on the writing, grievance responses. And much like a labor relations rep being the importance of being boring, maybe I'm boring and I just think labor relations people should be boring, but no, with grievance issues and all that kind of stuff, again, there's already enough escalation that when drafting or responding, that a little bit of formality in terms of how we respond can help. It just keeps the conversation up here, so it doesn't reduce into something emotional or counterproductive, if you will. So the simple practice of always responding in a letter format, even if you're emailing it, is a good way to sort of set that boundary in terms of this is not informal communication. Emails are for giving directions and setting up meetings, but overall correspondence should be on letterhead, and it just sets a slightly different tone. I like learning from my mistakes. I guess I was forced to, like all of us. I had early in my career, I wrote this scathing email that it was just, I was quite proud of myself. Not an email, it was a letter. But I was quite proud of myself. I thought, geez, I just socked it to him. And my boss ended up, it went to my counterpart and then up and then to my boss. And my boss sent a note back to me simply stating there are times for letters like that, and that was not one of them. And I guess I'll say, and that was close to 20 years ago, I don't know that I've actually really had a time for a letter like that, to be truthful, since that kind of real punchy, I sure showed them letter. That's just not, that's really not a useful place for most labor relations people to be. That doesn't mean we have to be soft on the issue. It just, the tone, it just never did belong there. And I learned that one. That was a crystal clear message and a message received. So the point is as we write our letters, let's learn from them. What is effective? what inspires responses which are productive, and what inspires responses that are not productive. The key with the letters too is to talk to people and not at people. A union rep already knows if you respect them or not. You can't fake that. And if you don't respect them, you can't talk to them. And your letters are even more importantly so. They have to have the tone of talking to them, not at them. So keep the lectures down. If you have to explain something, do it with the view to explain rather than point out the flaws in their argument. Take a legitimate approach on explaining your situation or your viewpoint rather than lecturing. Lecturing just inspires a pushback response. And I guess this is one of my pet peeves, is I see letters from LR reps, senior reps too actually, that like to state in grievances denied. And I've done it too. You know, that takes you off the place, if you will, of having an adult to adult conversation with your union counterpart. This puts you in a position of presumed power over them. And again, it's going to inspire a pushback response. And it's quite arrogant, quite frankly. Arbitrators deny grievances. Companies disagree with grievances. And the sooner that an LR person can get that through their head, the less condescending they're going to be, and the more likely there's going to be an elevated conversation that ensues with the union counterpart, your union counterpart. In terms of the writing itself, is go into enough detail to show that they've heard them. I like starting my letters with actually articulating in the fairest way possible, without restating incorrect facts, but the fairest way possible, that I've heard the union, that I understand their position. And then I go through and I look at, well, usually there's maybe 30% of what the union's grieving about is actually the rub point. And usually there's commonality around the rest. So I look for things to narrow the discussion. Okay, I agree with you on this point. I agree with you on this point. I don't think it leads to that. So I look for areas of agreement. And if something's just a complete a distraction that doesn't enhance either the grievance or the overall relationship with the union, or sometimes you'll get a larger issue where the union just starts to conflate it with every single issue that comes up, I like to declare that that is a non-issue. It doesn't mean that it's not something that has to be talked about, but just simply to state that it's not an issue in regards to this grievance. And also, if you wanted to leave an opening, you could also say, look, we can handle this grievance without interfering with our respective positions on this outside issue that you put forward. It just gives the union an excuse to drop that noise, if you will. Then we can actually focus on what's the important part of this specific grievance that you're dealing with. So yeah, then we narrowly identify the actual rub, and then we confront where we differ with those opinions and why. And I'm not shy to point to examples and share how arbitrators look at this. For example, William Scott co-analysis for discipline and terminations. I like to put that right into my letters, at least certain elements of it. Agonize over it, blow it out, and that gives the union ammo. It shows that we've actually looked at the concern and we're considering it, and we just land on a different viewpoint. But we're not ignoring, we're not stating a position. We're actually reviewing and sharing our analysis. And then whenever we have the opportunity to do so, I like to share the problem. And it's not a download. It's actually, this is about part of grievances is, if you look at it, they're an opportunity to reset the relationship. They're an opportunity to reaffirm the partnership. So if we share the problem, and we definitely have to use a little bit of that empathy skill in this, and also help the union understand why it's their problem too, then in so doing that we can actually start to shift the conversation from the specific issue and just gently remind that there's an ongoing relationship, an ongoing worksite that needs our assistance here. Then I usually recommend a path forward, and if there is a way to give an excuse or help the union save face, which is obvious, I like to put that in there. That's a lot different from, however, backing off a position, like where we started this conversation, where a lot of younger or less experienced labor relations people either cave in or they go to arbitration. So then we recommend the path forward. So with all that in place, then we write. And again, put it on letterhead and send it off. I hope this has been useful to you. If you have any questions, please give me a call at 780-886-1679. I don't mind the idea of coming in and doing a little bit of a lunch and learn for those that might be interested, both on the union and on the management side. I don't think this is particularly, I think this is agnostic in terms of who the parties are, but we're open to that as well. So thank you for your time and attention, and good luck with your labor relations files. Thank you.